So to start, I'm going to go to my images and I'm going to go ahead and find the one that I'm looking for, which is this image of some people eating pizza, or grabbing slices of pizza, I should say. I want to edit the background so it's more white. I want to make sure that this cutting board is actually straight. And then I want to get rid of this logo so that I can put my own logo on it later. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to duplicate this image. It's just a force of habit. It's great in case I make a mistake later or I want to do something else. I don't have to go in my files and find it again. It's just already there. I'm then going to go to the crop tool. If you select this little level ruler looking thing, you can go ahead and click and drag along the point that you want to be straight, and it will go ahead and automatically align it for you. And so now that cutting board is actually straight, which is what we are hoping for. And then to get the background whiter, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to use this. It kind of looks like one of those half-dipped cookies. I'm going to click it. It's the adjustment layers, and I'm going to click curves. I will use this little eyedropper that's filled with the light color, and I will select basically the place where I want the image to view as the lightest point. So in theory, it's some of this white background. Now, quite literally the lightest point is probably here, but if I move my cursor to darker parts, it's going to edit it as such. So if I click here, where it's not exactly literally the lightest, but a little bit towards where there's a shadow, it's going to go ahead and bring everything a little bit more vibrant, which I think is the look I'm going to go for. So just to show you the difference between the two. Now, depending on what you're looking to do, this might be good enough. However, if you want it to be completely, like, perfectly white, what I'm going to recommend is using the pen tool to create a mask and cut out this shape and then get rid of the background. So to do that, I will click the layer with my image, and I'm going to go click the pen tool, which is P for short, and I'm going to go ahead and just start creating this outline. And it doesn't have to be too perfect because you can always edit it later. Once I'm about ready to finish, when I hover over that last spot, you'll see that the pen tool kind of forms a circle, and that means I'm creating a shape. I'm going to go here, and I want it to make a mask. And as you can see right here, it shows you exactly what that outline looks like. All right, so similar to Illustrator, I'm going to make sure that I have my direct selection tool selected. It's just the same as Illustrator where it's white. And then I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to click on my lines. From here, I can modify that curvature. I can determine if I need another point, and modify all of the splines. Again, don't worry too much if it's perfect or not, because if it's a super small detail, the likelihood that someone's going to be able to see it is pretty small. You just want to make sure that you're getting enough where it's not glaringly obvious that you haven't fully edited something. All right, so I'm pretty happy with this. I've gotten rid of essentially all of that kind of off-white coloring, and just to kind of show what that looks like, I'm going to add a solid background of white, and you can just see that there's none of that gross off-white shadow whatever. If you wanted to go ahead and add a shadow in from this, you can either add a drop shadow, or you can go ahead and use the brush tool and manually create a shadow. I'm just going to show you how I would manually create a shadow. I'm adding another layer. I'm going to go to the brush tool, and essentially when it comes to shadows, there is going to be kind of the soft, fluffy shadow that we're going for. So I'm going to make my brush pretty big, and I'm going to make it black, and I'm just going to go ahead and draw the shadow on. Now I'm sure this is kind of alarming to see because it looks very aggressive, but I will show you how we tone that down in just a little. You will need to think about where the light is coming from. So for me, I'm going to put the shadow underneath the left side of the arm, not really the right side. And I'm also only going to put a little bit of a shadow on the top. So this part right here where I made it pretty thick, I'm going to actually have to kind of erase some of that, and I'm going to add more down here into the side. All right, so this is one of those cases where like an eraser is more or less totally fine because it's just that simple, shape, but you could also totally create a mask on this as well. Because this is simple, I'm just going to use the eraser. I'm going to again make this super fluffy, so I'm going to put the hardness at 0, and I'm going to make it pretty big, and I'm just going to slowly go and make this pretty little. I'm going to go ahead and go back to the brush. I'm going to make that light again. And I'm going to add in the shadow of the arm. Okay, so now that this is more or less what I'm looking for, I will go ahead and I'm going to go to opacity, I'm going to go to multiply, and then I'm going to crank this opacity all the way down. And now it's starting to look a lot more shadow-like. To kind of tweak it and fine-tune it so that it is a little bit more realistic, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to add a mask onto this. I'm going to use the brush tool, and I'm just going to actually crank this up to be quite big. And I'm just going to slowly kind of feather this. It's important to consider what the actual shading is in the image before really determining whatever shadow it is. So for example, it's pretty top down, and so even though there's more shadow underneath the arm, I still don't want to go too overboard with it. You can go ahead and modify the opacity as well when you're doing this, and that could help just ease up on some of that harshness. So I'm going to make this a little bit smaller. I have that opacity eased up quite a bit, and I can use it to really soften up those lines. If anyone has ever watched makeup tutorials, we're really hitting that blending hard. If I realize that I've kind of lost some of the shadow that I initially had and it's too much, I can go ahead and I can switch my brush color to white, and then I can slowly work on adding it back in. And because I've made this opacity pretty light, it's not super aggressive even when I do add it in again. I'm now going to work on editing this Coca-Cola label. I could either use the stamp tool, which you press S for stamp. You're probably going to want to make the size a lot smaller. And essentially, you select where you want it to pull the pixels from, and then you will, you're going to want to make sure you have your image selected, and it will go ahead and fill it in. Now, this is a type of destructive editing, meaning that when I'm doing this, there's not like a filter I can turn on and off. So you do need to be pretty careful with the stamp tool, because essentially you're just going to have to be clicking undo over and over again until you can get something that you're happy with. Go in, and I'm actually going to be a little bit more strategic with what I have it selecting. So essentially I only want to highlight the Coca-Cola label, because if I highlight the whole bottle, it's not going to have anything to pull from when it's creating this new layer for us. So I will go to selection. I don't need to feather this. I'm going to go to edit, and if you click content aware fill here instead of going to fill, it will show you where it's pulling those pixels from. So here it's showing us that it's pulling the pixels from all around it and just on that red label, which is actually what we want. So we are going to hit OK, and it's put it on a new layer. So for example, if I get rid of it with the eye tool, it's a new layer. And I actually am pretty happy with that, but there's obviously still a few tweaks to be made. I'm going to select the two layers. I'm going to right click, and I'm going to merge. Now, something to note is that it's gotten rid of this vector mask. It's applied it. I'm okay with it in this situation, but if I didn't want that to happen, I would definitely want to copy this, and I'll just apply it to some random layer. Or I'll just copy this, and I will paste in place, and then I will only select one of them. I will merge, and then I will drag this mask onto the layer that I want, and then I will delete that backup layer. And now I still have the mask that I can use if I want to, and now both of these red layers are put together as one. I can use the healing tool, so J, and I'm going to make this actually a little bit smaller. And I'm just going to make sure I'm on the right layer. I'm just going to paint over those areas that are a little funky. And there we go. I wonder if I can get rid of some of this little detail stuff. Now, because I know that Coca-Cola red is kind of a proprietary color, I want to actually change the coloring of this label so that I don't run into any issues. We'll say that I really like the color purple, and I want to make this label purple. I'm going to go to my hue and saturation, and I'm going to change this hue. Now, don't worry about the rest of the image. I'm just focusing on this part right here. Let's say I want it to be kind of like this purpley pink, and I'm happy with that. I'm going to now use the paint bucket tool, which the shortcut is G, and I'm going to press, make sure it's black, and now that filter is not being applied to anything. If I take my paintbrush and make my paintbrush white, and I'm going to make this a lot smaller, and I'm going to make the hardness 100%, and I have the opacity at 100. I can go ahead and click somewhere else and hold shift, and it creates that straight line for me. When I'm ready for exporting this, I'm going to turn off the background. Something that is important to do is to go to the image and then go to the image size and see what the resolution is. So I actually want the resolution image to be much bigger because it is going to be printed. And so I can go ahead and just type in the desired resolution that I want, and I have it automatically resample. Now that this is set at 300 pixels per inch, I know that it'll print pretty nicely and I don't have to worry about it being blurry. So here I'll go to export, export as. I will make sure that the height and width and the scale all look appropriate. And it says that the size is going to be 28.6 megabytes, which is huge. So I'm actually going to take the scale and I'm going to bring it down to like 50% and see where that gets us. Okay, it's down to 9.9. I'm actually going to see what happens if I put it to 33. All right, so it's 5.2 megabytes, which is much better. So I'm going to deal with that, and I'm going to go to export. The next image that I'm going to edit is this illustration. Now, I kind of want to recolor this in a way that feels a bit more modern. So again, I'm going to have my background image. I'm going to duplicate it, turn that back one off. From here, I am going to go to curves, use the white eyedropper again, pick roughly the whitest spot, and figure out what looks the best. That is too bright. I'm pretty happy with this, and I'm just going to see what that looks like. And then I'm going to change this to black and white. And I'm going to play with the different presets. I know that there's a lot of red in this, so I'm going to choose the red filter. And I'll play around with the different filters. When I'm happy, I'm going to leave it like that. I'm also going to go ahead and I'm going to edit the brightness and contrast. So I'm going to kick the brightness up a little bit as well as the contrast. Then I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to crop this just so that I don't have to deal with pixels that I'm not interested in. I probably could have started with this first, but that's all right. So I'm going to use the quick selection tool, and I'm going to use my mouse to just go through and like highlight everything that I want it to select. And it's kind of like a magnet where it will, if you draw it near something, it'll just go ahead and add it into its selection. I'm first focusing on trying to get everything that I want selected, and then I'll go ahead and I will refine this line that it's kind of putting together for me. To do the select and mask, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to tweak everything so that it is highlighting what I want it to. It's a little hard to see, but essentially it will make the things that you want visible darker, and then everything you don't want visible will be kind of lightened a little bit. you can see that transparency a little bit more if you do this. I'm gonna press OK, and I'm gonna click this mask tool, and now it has masked out all of the stuff that I don't want, and I can go ahead with my brush and fine tune more of this. So as you're watching this recording, so I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to add another layer below the one that I'm working on, and I'm going to make the background black. And this will allow me to see maybe some areas that weren't quite as clear before. So for example, this little line. And then when I go back into my mask, I can really quickly see what I'm doing and get rid of it. All right, I'm pretty happy with this now, so I can go ahead and do that gradient map that I wanted to do earlier. So, put a gradient map, and I'm going to make the darks like this dark blue. I'm going to make the whites a light purple. And you might notice that it isn't really showing anything on here, and that's because the black and white layer is on top of the gradient map. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to rearrange this and put it on top. And now we can really see that gradient map take effect. I think it's a little too dark in the light areas, so I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to modify this a little bit more. And I want this to be like pretty kind of punchy, because my look that I'm going for is a little bit futuristic, or a little kind of space-esque, if you will. So it's okay that it doesn't really look natural. I'm actually going to go ahead and I'm going to modify the opacity of this. And then I have something that I'm pretty happy with. And I'm going to try one more variation of this just to kind of see what I'm working with. So I'm going to keep the darks the same. I'm going to make the lights a kind of really fluorescent cyan, which I think might actually fit the look and feel of what I was going for even more. And already I'm actually pretty happy with what this is looking like. And so from here, I'm going to press OK. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to export this as well. Kind of recap. You know, I did a lot of funky stuff with this image, but I can always turn off these layers and I'm still left with the original image as it was colored. And, you know, I can go ahead and say, you know what, I don't want the curves in here, but I want it to be recolored. And you can see how when you make it black and white, it really changes what parts get colored. Maybe I like this more of like a mid-tone color that pops through. And so I want to turn that filter off, or let's say I bring this to critique and my professor's like, whoa, I don't think this is working. It's not a big deal. I can go ahead and turn it off, and it is literally one click, which is just the best piece of advice I could possibly give when it comes to doing Photoshop. Is try to make things easier for your future self, make things in a way where you can undo it if you don't like it, or if you realize later that you've made a mistake.